So here you have a piece from 1994, which is a tussar silk ensemble, and you can see that the inspiration that came from higher up remained over many years, because in 2014 we were still doing it, or doing it again, with black and white leather. The idea is basically that a hand-me-down idea that comes from somewhere which you could call traditional or imaginary is really important to stick to and to bring out again and again, because those impulses could actually help a whole industry afterwards. And that's exactly what we're doing by bringing out this new collection that we call, well, it's not that new, it's been around for over 10 years now, which is called Jeans, as in genetics, Jeans Lecoanet Hemant. You have here an evening dress from 2014, which is a homemade in atelier woven lace, which is on the right. And in the new collection this season, summer 2026, you have a gents banyan depicted in the same technique. So on the left you have a piece which was made in sometime in the 90s, which is a 3D woven top which we had made with the Aubusson carpet weavers. It was made in some 37 different colors, which were all tinted in a basement with candlelight to keep the color impression constant. And it was based on a painting, a landscape painting that came from Didier Lecoanet at that time, framed in a hand-woven brocade from Kyoto by a brocade master. And the same idea was used nearly 40 years later on a T-shirt, simply printed, where again Didier Lecoanet painted a landscape, and just we had it printed on the T-shirts. So these kind of impressions for us keep us alive, and just we keep on rotating.
But one of the things, Hemant, you and I were talking about earlier is this idea of like not looking back, right? And especially with craft, I mean, with all segments of craft, there's always this kind of constant question of how much do you go back into heritage? How much do you sort of, well, innovate?
Well, I think the human mind perceives novelty in clothes. If there's about a 5% innovation. If it's too much, it becomes like art, and art is not something that people actually wear. Even if you talk about wearable art, I think it is art that is possibly wearable on a body. But I don't think anyone really walks around with those kinds of clothes. So we are commercial artists, and 50% of our work has to be sellable. But I think it's really important not to make it 100% sellable, because then the innovation somehow stays away and people don't perceive it as anything really very new, which is fine in a world of traditionalism or neo-traditionalism, where you have to cater exactly to, I'm of course referring to the Indian wedding market, which is a phenomenon which is now more or less a competition to Bollywood, I would say. And in fact, we have been living through moments that never existed before. I mean, the weddings are so bombastic that Greek weddings now sound primitive. So it's a whole industry of itself, but that preserving of the tradition will certainly not bring innovation. So innovation is at a different level. I suppose it's AI, it's lighting, it's music, it's all that kind of stuff. But we're talking about the product.
But then, you know, that balance is a bit difficult, right? And I think one of the things that's interesting about fashion, which I think decor and design hasn't quite learned, is, I mean, Pret exists in fashion. In decor or design objects, there is everything has sort of become at a haute couture level, right? In the sense that the price points are so high that for most people to engage with design is actually really difficult.
Yes, and this is precisely for us. We wanted to stay away from that. We'd been through it in Paris. We'd seen what it's like to actually be trying to innovate with each and every piece that you do, and you end up having maybe 1,000 clients on the whole planet.
Yeah. But I like that tag, that line that you came up with, daily exception wear.
Yes, that's what we're trying to do is, well, that's exception wear, that T-shirt, even if it's a T-shirt.
How do you define that? I mean, how do you define, or rather, what does that client look like?
Well, it's actually more of a recognition that in India, you actually dress up once in your life. And I felt that the other days had importance as well.
You mean wedding wear?
I mean, wedding wear, yes,
yeah.
which is so exceptional that you can actually possibly just wear it once. And it's a bit of a shame for all the work that goes into it. And of course, it's much too bombastic to be worn more. So.
But then, I mean, one of the reasons, am I wrong to say that one of the reasons why so many people in fashion do wedding wear is that the economics of it work better than Pret? Is that correct?
Well, it depends how big. I mean, if the unit is very, very big in wedding wear, yes, but if you're into the actual ready-to-wear business and industry, well, it depends on how many pieces you actually edit and how many you sell, and what kind of a web you have for your sales, of course.
So we were discussing last week, actually. You have now reached 45 years.
Yes, 45 years,
in retail.
Well, if you call haute couture retail, yes, but that was more selling of a single art piece each time. I think we never even did a single piece twice in our whole life at that time. Whereas now, editing them, let's say at 500 or 700 or 1,000 pieces in a series is quite normal.
So, but how do you sort of, this idea of innovation, and especially in fashion, the timelines are so quick. How are you able to, or rather, what are your timelines? How many collections do you do, for instance?
One every 6 months, obviously, but if you want to really be functioning on the international level, you have to be 3 seasons ahead, which means that we are now working on winter 28.
How do you define innovation? I think that's a question that we should be starting with also.
Like everyone does, trends, ideas, emotions, analysis, everything comes together, trying to innovate by the combination of things, because when you're a small manufacturer, which means you're not making 10 or 100,000 pieces in a series, you're bound by a certain amount of things that you cannot develop yourself. So it has to be homemade, and you just hope that in all of that homemade stuff there is 1 or 2 little formulas that can actually go industrial, because if it's not industrial, it's not going to happen in fashion.
When you say industrial, you're saying production to scale, to a
yes, well,
scalable
it's like Asian paints without pigments.
Good point. So I wanted to sort of run through a couple of images of the kind of work that I focus on. These pieces, this for instance is a leather, it's untreated leather. It's manufactured actually by a team at the gallery in Bangalore. And it's an interesting thing because the origins of this leather and the inspiration of these pieces is traditional puppetry. The leather comes from a place called Dharmavaram, and it was designed by an Italian designer, actually, Andrea Anastasio. And it's interesting that it's this kind of like cross-pollination of ideas and places and stories that has kind of produced this. What you just saw was actually a puppetry performance from Kerala. And what is interesting in the craft space, where we're all sort of trying to figure out a balance between designing things for contemporary usage and balancing that with both the availability of manpower as well as people who sort of know the processes involved. And like I was saying earlier, the origins of the origin of the material and the origin of the craft, even though the sort of final intention of it was a little different, now you see it sort of interpreted in this completely design way. This is a piece that was designed by architect David Joe Thomas. What we've used here are strap textile straps. So in Tamil Nadu, in Chettinad, they use these straps to make bags. And they used to use a fiber, but they've stopped using that, and they use these straps because obviously it lasts longer. And what we wanted to do was to actually try and use that color and design language in a product that could be scaled bigger. And so the designer worked with craftspeople from Chettinad to sort of create these colorways that would make what are sort of functional objects that come from a craft practice.
I think it's really important to have that meeting point between traditionalism and something modern, which is exactly what makes culture go ahead.
Yeah.
That's what I meant earlier when I said, let's not start looking back, let's try to keep at least the eyes on the present and then go to the future.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because, you know, I think at the end of the day, especially now with AI and all of the rest of it, we want objects that tell stories. And these are objects that kind of relate place and person quite interestingly, but obviously you also want it to be applicable to contemporary homes and contemporary spaces and be able to, you know, to be able to live with it. So it's this constant dichotomy of like how much is too much and where do you sort of draw the line, right? And it's also, I think it's interesting when you're able to work with artisans to be able to kind of do that themselves, because there is a bit of a hierarchy, especially in craft, where the designer hierarchically is above the craftsman. Mm-hmm. And one of the challenges of innovation is constantly trying to balance that, because you don't want a top-down...
Or not, Manju, unfortunately. If you look at the thousands, if not millions, of sari weavers who insist on continuing the way they've learned it, and you can hardly be against the idea, because that's the way they know the tradition was established, and they have to continue that way, and they think it's sacrilege to change. But is what's happening around us, is it sacrilege? It's real life. So somehow adapting seems important, but it's not always in people's focus.
That's actually one of the challenges of working in the craft space that very few people like to admit, is that there are challenges to it because, you know, human beings are complicated, mm-hmm. right? And demand and supply aren't always paired. You can't always be assured of timelines. There is sometimes a lot of pushback, like you said.
It's exactly the challenge. If you look at a brand like Bottega Veneta, do you actually see the artisanship in it? There's a hell of a lot. Of getting those weaves right and those straight. That's more or less what we were showing 30 years ago also. It's the same thing. It's about the perfection of serial produce, including artisanship. That's actually the real challenge, and that's what's not always happening. When your structure is too small, as I said before, you probably won't be able to produce it right.
Well, I think in the design space, one of the things that one has had to accept is that scalability is difficult.
Yes.
Right? Something like this takes, at least a month to make. You can't make large numbers of these pieces because there are processes in there that are made by hand. At the same time, you know, people get sick, people go on leave. And so there's always, and to some extent, that scalability issue is something that most of us who are working in this space have had to kind of accept, that it's not always going to be a 100 crore business.
Well, and also you have to see the day-to-day life in this country is that the artisan you counted on might just become an Uber driver tomorrow.
Yeah, and have an easier life of it. This is actually the origin of the chairs that I just showed. These are the origins of that work. So they've been using these to make bags, and we were able to sort of work with two of the ladies from Chettinad actually, who kind of worked on the colorways with the designer. And it's interesting because their idea of color and partnership of color is very, very interesting, and there aren't as many sort of inhibitions about color usage that I think a lot of people have now. And so it was very interesting, this kind of process of working to scale up a weave pattern that they'd always been using.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. You've been saving that trick.
There are two objects that I wanted to show, which show what you were looking at. That gentleman was a late Mr. Rauf. He was a Bidri expert, and he worked in a craft technique called Bidri. So he was responsible for making, him and his family were responsible for making these pieces for us. These are lights that also Andrea worked on. And this is another example of sort of working with material and processes that are, heritage practices, but creating something that was completely, a completely new iteration. I mean, if those of you who know Bidri work know that it is a very ornamental, very Mughalesque artworks that come from that practice. So we wanted to we kind of turned that idea on its head here. And what you saw was the last bit of that process where this alloy of copper and zinc is treated with mud from Bidar. And this doesn't work if you use mud from anywhere else or any kind of chemical composition from anywhere else. You need the mud from Bidar to be used to wash these pieces, and it creates this kind of, accentuates the silver work in the work. And, to me, it's a great example of very geographically and contextually really important thing that you can't actually take out of there to anywhere else. So it means that you have to keep going back to that particular place and artisans from there to be able to make that. Now, of course, that also means there are challenges. Mr. Rauf passed away last year, in fact. So then there are the issues of like, how do you keep something like that going? But it's, to me, it's quite a...
Well, in our business, it's not about keeping it going, it's about stopping it. I mean, sorry, Rohit Bal was telling me that in his workshops, if he told someone to do that very embroidery, which was in gold, now to do it in purple, the fellow would just leave, he'd go home. So getting innovation under people's skin is very difficult also.
But how are you able to, so what do you do? I mean, are you saying that you simply stop?
Well, it doesn't apply to me actually, because this was a traditional workshop which was dealing in traditional designs. And according to him, the embroiderer would decide what kind of a design would be put onto the top according to his own heritage and his legacy.
And is not willing to change on
And is absolutely no discussion about it.
But is there a difference now with are there a new crop of younger embroiderers and craftspeople who are coming into the practice?
I'm not too sure.
Because with design, I think that is a
because
real
the
challenge.
innovation, the spark of innovation doesn't really exist at all. You have exceptional characters. It's always a single character in the artisan field. So it really depends on the person. If someone is okay about it, yes, they will do it. But you do see in the work of Rahul Mishra, for example, when he goes to Paris, that there are traditional techniques that have been interpreted in a new way, but they still are the same techniques.
But there's also been at least in fashion, I feel like there's a lot more India being seen as this kind of outsourced.
Well, it has been for the last 40 years. And I mean, it's absolutely normal to go to Valentino or Dior or anyone else, or even Chanel, and that the embroideries come from India.
But now everyone knows that, right? Doesn't that sort
yes,
of make
but it doesn't change anything. The fact is that it's there, and it's still the same thing, and we are on the very same recipes that we had 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So it's about painting this way or painting that way, but it's still the same paint.
Well, I think with material innovations and I think design in all of these sectors, the human factor is always going to be a bit of a issue, right? I mean, and how one is able to work.
Well, you wonder when you saw that sale of that one painting that was made by an IA, and that was sold for $1.5 million, and it was like a mixture of all the big masters from the past all together. What is the value?
Well, value, I think, is perception.
Yes.
Right.
But it's like Esperanto versus French.
Well, so we wanted to just kind of run through elements of our practice in order to sort of showcase what we're doing, I think, in both of our sort of segments.
Thank you. Can we have a big round of applause, please?